All right, let's talk Dallas Cowboys. I'm Nick, and this is our daily Cowboys show. A lot of news as we get closer to the final preseason game, just Friday evening, a few short days away. Then, of course, gearing up for the regular season. We're getting closer and closer. And to that end, we're seeing some roster moves and some, I'll say, position battles starting to take some shape when you dive deep into the data. Let's get started with our stat of the day, as we like to on this channel, a little palate cleanser. So let me pull this up here for you guys. This was courtesy of Brandon Lore. I thought this was very interesting. Cowboys rookie offensive lineman Tyler Booker and Ajani Cornelius didn't allow a single pressure in week 2 of the preseason. For Cornelius, it's the second time or week in a row he's accomplished that. Little grammar thing for Lore, but no problem there. It's a great report. You should follow him on social media. He does a lot of really good stuff. But look, we talked about Booker's performance yesterday and did the film review yesterday. If you haven't seen it, make sure you check it out. Look, Booker played well. I think Cornelius, what we're seeing at the offensive tackle position in general, is a lot of really good depth. They're going to have to make some tough decisions. You look at Adinji, you look at Nate Thomas getting a lot of reps, of course, with Guyton hurt. You look at, of course, Asim Richards, a guy who's played football before. There's a really good problem to have the Cowboys have with depth at the offensive tackle position. Not that it's been perfect. It really hasn't been an offensive tackle this preseason, but there's been enough quality play where you can look at this and say there's a few tough decisions that are going to have to be made. And it's one of the things that can come out of the preseason, right? Can you find a position group where you have some good depth? And I think the Dallas Cowboys have shown that at offensive tackle, which has been an issue in the past. I think they're going to have to figure out who their swing tackles are going to be, who their backups are going to be. They're in a great position. So a lot of people have been concerned with the Dallas Cowboys' performance. I think from an individual level, they found they've got good offensive tackle depth. Not that these guys are going to be all pros or anything, but good backups here. Great job by these guys stepping up when their opportunities were there. And again, good on the Cowboys for finding some of these guys and developing them and letting them become, in my opinion, quality backup offensive linemen. All right, next report. This is courtesy of Nick Harris from the Fort Worth Star-Telegram. He kind of replied to a post first from Tom Pelissero. Big news of the day. Veteran cornerback Michael Ojemudia, who most recently played for the UFL's DC Defenders, is signing with the Cowboys per source. He's back in the NFL. Harris, who you should follow on social media, he does a great job with his reporting, courtesy of the Fort Worth Star-Telegram. Cowboys add some veteran cornerback help in the final week of the preseason as injuries build up even more at that position. Ojemudia was a third-round pick by Denver in 2020, playing for Matt Eberflus in 2022 in Chicago, and is coming off a good year in the UFL. So he's a veteran guy who knows the defense, who knows Eberflus's strategy, right? You kind of know what he gets. There's been some sort of reports out there. I think Benjamin Albright, who's does a lot of work for the Denver Broncos, said, listen, he's a willing tackler, good run support guy, has some issues in coverage. He's not terrible in coverage, but he's not exactly a lockdown corner, which makes sense, right? He wasn't playing in the National Football League. I think he's a guy who can come in and he's not going to be a disaster. And I think we're going to see a theme here. And I got some other reports that I'm going to talk to in just a second, that the Cowboys roster and a lot of the names we've seen get a lot of playing time, there's a chance that some guys are not going to make this roster, and the Cowboys coaching staff are not happy with a lot of key players. I think the signing of Ojemudia, obviously, it's a lot with depth, the injuries, and things like that. They want some veteran guys. They're going to give them a lot of opportunities, I think, the final week of the preseason here against the Atlanta Falcons on Friday evening, because, again, he knows the defense. He's been in the NFL. I don't think it'll be too big of an issue to get some reps, even on short notice for the Cowboys this Friday, so I'm excited to see how he does. But I think it's very clear here the Cowboys, they're going to shake up this roster. There's a lot of changes coming that I think people are going to be surprised about. All right, next report here. Get some positive news on Jaden Blue, a guy we haven't seen in the preseason yet. According to Patrick Walker at Voice of the Star, another great follow. 3 for 3. These are 3 really good reporters getting things going today on the show. Jaden Blue with his foot/ankle is trending positively, and Brian Scheinheimer is, quote, optimistic and hopeful for the Cowboys rookie could make his preseason debut versus the Falcons. It's still to be determined at the moment, though. Yeah, one of the things that's happened this preseason, there's been a lot of criticism about, what the Cowboys running game doesn't look better. It looks the same issues as last year. And, of course, the reality is, listen, you haven't played, you played Cooper Beebe for like 12 snaps. You played Tyler Booker, who's going to be a starter, for about 25 snaps last week. Other than that, you played no starters, right? You're dealing with injuries at the offensive tackle. So not only are you playing no starters, is that Nate Thomas is actually, who would realistically, you'd probably be playing Guyton to get some more reps, to get better and improvement. He's actually taking Guyton's reps. So you're actually worse at your starting group in the preseason, because Nate Thomas, who probably wouldn't start playing until the third quarter, now has to play the first quarter as well. So there's a compound effect with injuries. It happens during the regular season, but we're seeing it trickle down in the preseason as well. And we're seeing it at the running back position, right? Miles Sanders didn't play a lot. We've seen Blue with injuries. What does that mean? It means Deuce Vaughn gets a lot of touches, right? It means we don't get a lot of opportunities to see a guy like Blue, who normally you get a lot of carries, a lot of chances. Now, I think he's going to be a good player. I'm a big fan of Jalen Blue. I think at this point we can all agree it's going to be Williams. He's going to be the primary back. I think it's going to be Blue's going to get some opportunities and some touches. I really look at Deuce Vaughn as a guy who doesn't have a position on this roster. I mean, because in terms of a pass catcher, a more athletic, scat, kind of agile back, Blue is better in every, at least in my opinion. We haven't seen him on the field yet, of course, in terms of preseason. He's looked good in training camp and on the practice field. Blue is better in every aspect. If you're looking for a short yardage guy, Maffa's better. Although I don't even know if Maffa makes the roster, because it comes down, in my opinion, between Maffa and Miles Sanders. And look, Miles Sanders ran hard, right? And we saw he's a veteran guy, and even have Malik Davis running hard as well. So there's going to be a lot of things to change at the running back position. I'm expecting there to be a few surprises among that group, but it's good news that Blue is hopefully going to see the field Friday. It'd be great to see him. The most important thing, stay healthy, right? Be healthy during the preseason. That is the most important thing. People forget about that, right? The worst thing that can happen is injuries. And on the note of playing time, John Machota over at The Athletic posted, Joe Milton will be the Cowboys starting quarterback in Friday's preseason finale. They want to see more from Milton. Dak Prescott will not play in the preseason. I want to give Schottenheimer and his staff and the leadership there a lot of credit for two reasons. Number one, I think the most important thing for any leader, and really any person, anyone who's worked in, whether it's a corporate business or they run your own small business or anything in between, right? The most important thing, in my opinion, among whether it's an employee to the CEO, is consistency, right? Consistency in your work habits, but consistency in your strategy and plan. It doesn't mean you don't deviate. It doesn't mean you don't make changes, but you don't radically change, week to week, month to month, year to year. I've worked in terms of corporate America with companies where we'll be radically going down this one business path, like throwing everything behind it, right? We're full speed ahead. And 6 months later, we're flipping like 180 to something completely different. And it just upsets the whole apple cart. Everyone's confidence goes away. I've seen that on projects where it's like, listen, our whole goal here is 100% undeniably so. Do whatever it takes to deliver a great product on time. And then there's a meeting that happens, and then the next morning the leadership comes in and says, hey guys, now it's all about cutting costs. That's the most important thing by far. So you have an inconsistency to it, and you have the workers, the mid managers. Everyone's like, what's the goal here? Is the strategy going to change? What's going on? I think the fact that Schottenheimer, even with two lackluster preseason performances, again, listening to the media, and honestly the product on the field wasn't great for reasons we've talked about a lot already on this channel. I think the fact that he's sticking with his strategy, listen, we are using the preseason, it's so clear, to evaluate and develop Milton. That's obvious. That was clearly, now that we've seen this based on all this reporting, priority number one for the Cowboys preseason on offense was to work on the development of Joe Milton. That's it, guys. That's what Schottenheimer's entire strategy was in terms of his primary focus this preseason. In terms of the 3 preseason games, work on Joe Milton's development. That's what this was. Now, you can say that's a wrong strategy or a bad strategy, but it's very clear that's what the Cowboys want to use this preseason to do, and that's what they've been doing. They're not radically changing. They're not listening to people like me or people on ESPN or Fox Sports saying, hey, what's going on with this team? They're saying, no, our whole focus, our strategy from day one as a coaching staff was to help Joe Milton's development, put him through the ringer, right? That's what we wanted to do, and we are sticking to that plan. I appreciate the Cowboys for their consistency, but I also love the fact that they're not going to play other starters, right? So last night I saw the bits and pieces of the Washington and Cincinnati preseason game, and I was blown away the fact that Washington played Jane Daniels, and he almost took a huge hit, right? I'll give a lot of people crapped on the Bengals safety Jordan Battle for not decleating Jane Daniels there near a goal line. A lot of people are like, what are you doing? I think it's preseason. Like, I don't think anyone wants to hurt each other. Can you imagine if you're a safety in the NFL in preseason and you decapitate a star young quarterback and knock him out for 3 months because you played in the preseason game? Again, I understand it's football and it's hard to control that, but guys don't want to play in the preseason, and that's why you get funky preseason performances. My God, the Bears beat the Bills 38-0, I think, the other day in the preseason. There are some teams like the Bills that just don't care at all in terms of their starters, right? The backups will play 100 miles an hour, and the third stringers and the fourth stringers will play 100 miles an hour. The starters want no part of it. And if that's the case, you rest them. Don't play them, right? The Bengals made that mistake. They want to play their starters because they want to try and change a culture or something, right? They're trying to turn away from the slow starts they've had. The reality is you get dud performances. You got guys out. I mean, Joe Burrow getting yanked around. You've got injury concerns. Avoiding the injuries and having a clear strategy in the preseason that's focused on development, I think is the right approach. You look at teams that are trying to look good in the preseason. I look at the Giants. I look at the Bengals. And I'm like, that is a problem. I look at the Bears, right? And I understand there's things you want to do to try and, get some rhythm and timing. But if your goal in the preseason is to play your starters to look good and build momentum, you've got problems, right? I think the reality is it's not college where you get a tune-up game, the old classic tune-up game. Hey, we're going to play a D1AA team before, old D1AA, now FCS, before a big rivalry game. It doesn't work in the NFL like that. I think you've got to be consistent. I think you've got to take the right approach in terms of getting players ready to play. And if the starters don't want to play in the preseason, if they're not psyched up, if you're running a vanilla game plan and you play them, bad things are going to happen. I think we're seeing that with those teams right now. I appreciate the Cowboys' consistency, avoiding that trap, even though a lot of people in the media want them to follow what I think is a bad model. All right, moving right along here. This is from Patrick Walker again. Schottenheimer tells me that the Cowboys, are in no way surprised at the ability of Tyler Booker to be a road grader in the run game. The team was very excited, however, to see just how well he performed his debut in pass protection. Like we already mentioned, Booker allowed 0 pressures versus Baltimore. So I think it's very interesting, right? I think coming out of college, my personal opinion was Booker was phenomenal pass protector and solid run blocker, right? It seems like the Cowboys, based on what they saw during training camp, felt he was doing better in run blocking than he was in pass protection. And I thought he performed better in pass protection than run blocking based on the film. But I think the Cowboys were excited with what they saw in terms of run blocking. Could be a little bit of just trying to hype your guy up here a little bit, hey, we're so, Booker's trying to work on his run blocking. And so publicly you say, hey, you're doing a great job, man, keep it up. Could be a little bit of thing like that going on. But again, Booker played well, and the Cowboys, I know it's preseason, grain of salt, but on an individual level, which is the most important thing you can do in the preseason, Booker played well. And I think that's a good sign, obviously, for the Cowboys. All right, next report here, again, back to John Machota. He quoted Cowboys coach Brian Schottenheimer. We're still in the information gathering process. We'll sit down after we play Friday. We'll make some decisions about the entire roster. There will probably be some surprises from some of the mock things that are out there in terms of, hey, I thought for sure this guy was going to make it. I think there's a lot of guys that are about to get cut that I think people are going to be a little surprised by. I think even Andrew Booth is probably gone. I think Troy Pride Jr. makes sense to be cut. Mozzie Smith is probably gone. There's going to be a couple offensive linemen. I think there's going to be some running backs too. A lot of receivers, right? I think there's a situation here where this team looks completely different in terms of like the back end and things like that. And obviously the starters and the quality players are not going to get touched. But I think Schottenheimer, what they've seen training camp and practice is more important than what you'll ever see in a preseason game. And I think right now he's made some clear decisions. They want to basically use this preseason game. They kind of use Baltimore this way, and I think they're going to use Atlanta too as sort of a final, hey, if you haven't showed me something yet, now's your last chance, because we're going to cut you, whether you're a veteran or a rookie or whatever. Like we're going to be really tough here, and I think that's the right approach, right? I think so many teams just look at it and say, well, we don't want to upset the apple cart too much. We don't want too much volatility. Obviously, every team is to cut down to the final 53. It just becomes usually a massive releasing of a lot of undrafted free agents and maybe a 7th or 6th round pick. I think the Cowboys are going to cut some veterans, and I think they're going to cut a healthy amount of veterans. That's based on, again, just what I'm reading between the lines, based on what Schottenheimer's saying, and saying, listen, we're going to make some changes. There's going to be some surprises. They added a veteran corner. I know they've had some injuries, but I tell you what, when you have injuries at the quarterback position, they bring in a veteran. You don't bring in a veteran unless you're really curious about what he can do in the situation, because they've already had 2 games to evaluate everyone else on the roster in all of training camp. At this point, I think they bring in a veteran because they actually want to see if he's better than what they have on the field as a backup corner. A lot of changes are coming to the roster, a lot of surprises. Again, that's what Schottenheimer's saying, and I believe him. All right, next report here. This is courtesy of Todd Archer, talking about the injury, Jonathan Mingo. Jonathan Mingo is looking at 4 to 6 weeks, if not longer, with the PCL injury he suffered versus Baltimore, according to source. Looking like he could go on injured reserves as designated to return at final cuts, which allows him to return this season. Good news there. Opens up a roster spot, and we're talking about an opportunity here. Okay, Holden. Okay, Flournoy. I think both those guys are about to get cut, right, to be totally honest. But the Mingo injury opens up an opportunity for him. You have got to show out. We've got to see what you can do. This is an opportunity, right? Holden had a really solid first preseason game and had moments in camp and then just disappeared. was, and it's not all his fault. I get it. There's some quarterback issues, but you got to prove that you're an NFL guy, right? You can't have a couple highlight catches or be a promising guy in rookie minicamps. You got to carry that forward, right? You can do well in those situations, so that's good. But if you don't carry that forward, you don't belong in the National Football League. And right now, Trayshawn Holden hasn't done that. Flournoy, I think, has a little bit more experience, but same thing. We got to see more. And this is an opportunity. Mingo's hurt, final preseason game, final week of practice. I think both of these guys right now are on the chopping block. One of them, if they have a great day or a great set of practices, they have a chance to hold on to a roster spot. We'll see how the practice squad shakes out. But disappointing for Mingo, obviously, but I think this is an opportunity for some of these other receivers to prove they belong on this roster. And to be totally honest, if we look at this position, wide receiver position for the Cowboys, we all know Lamb, Pickens, and of course Turpin's the weapon X. They want to run the football. Ferguson's going to catch a lot of passes at tight end. There's only so many footballs going to wide receiver 4. I mean, look, Tolbert is a solid guy. I know there's some rumors about potentially trading him for another defensive piece or something like that. That would be interesting. So again, this is an opportunity for a guy like Flournoy or Holden to be that wide receiver 4, really pass catching option number 5 in the Cowboys offense. So it's not like a high, volume position. If you can make some plays, some big plays, you can find a chance to get on this roster, especially if Tolbert gets traded, which we'll have to wait and see if that happens. I think there's a better than 0% chance, but based on the Mingo injury, I wouldn't be surprised if Tolbert stays, which means these guys are on the chopping block. They need to step up. All right, last report here. There's a lot of information here from Nick Harris, but I want to focus sort of halfway down the bottom here. You can go through the list here real quick. And, it's high level from Schottenheimer. Didn't like the team's physicality, which is not surprising. The Mingo injury, we should have run the ball better. More work on this. No change in Michael Parsons, blah, 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 blah. Some of the stuff I already mentioned. But one of the things that's very interesting halfway down there, the only time he mentioned the rookie in his notes here was he commended Jay's Toya's performance from the Ravens game. I thought that's very interesting, right? And it kind of goes in line with what we've seen earlier about veterans getting cut. I think Mozzie Smith is done. I thought he played better against Baltimore, but I don't think it was good enough, right? I think that right now Schottenheimer and Eberflus and everyone is just trying to set the defensive culture. You're a former first-round pick. You've been disappointing. You're gone, right? Because I think Toya right now and Mozzie Smith are close enough in performance, right, that you go with the young guy. You bring in probably a veteran if you can, him and Winfrey, Perry and Winfrey, Toya and Winfrey, and you man nose tackle, and it's going to be ugly. It's going to be tough. But I think they want to see Toya carry that performance over through week of practice and again another preseason game. He'll be a guy to watch. He's also on the chopping block too, by the way. Here's the thing. If he hasn't been perfect, right? If he doesn't play well this week and doesn't do good things in the preseason game, I think he's potentially on his way out as well. So this is a high-pressure situation for everyone, but the fact that Schottenheimer commended Toya specifically, I think is a two-part indication. One, that Mozzie Smith is likely done, which I've been saying for a long time, and number two, that Toya has an opportunity here to get on this football team and maybe carve out some playing time if he can build off the Baltimore Ravens performance. All right, that's it for the news there. Let's get into your comments from yesterday. A lot of interesting comments, as always. This is from Ed Moon Y4K commented, the dude talking about me, saying losses look bad is right. It's hard to be a fan of a team that gets way behind and just gives up all the time. Not fun. Well, I mean, the point is, do you want to have an ugly loss or an ugly win? I mean, to me, an ugly loss versus a good loss is a loss. I don't care, right? I look at the Bengals' defeat last year where OERA touched the block punt and they lost the game. Do you feel better about that loss versus what happened, I don't know, against Houston or something like that, or against New Orleans? Or no, a loss is a loss, right? You can say, well, the team played better, but you still lost the game. You still made critical mistakes, right? The difference is you made the critical mistake in the final 2 minutes as opposed to in the first quarter. So you didn't fall behind by 3 scores or the third quarter or whatever. And so the game was over in the fourth. You made a critical mistake at the end of the game. A loss is a loss is a loss, right? I hate the mentality. This is just me personally. I'm not trying to be, mean to you here or anything. I just hate the mentality. Well, if it's a close game, it's okay. No, let's get wins here. It's one thing if you play extremely well against a championship team and you lose it at the end because a Josh Allen has an MVP performance. But if you make mistakes, right, like OERA touching the punt, for example, that's an example to me of a bad losing team mistake and you lost. So it's a close game or a blowout. That's still a dumb way to lose, a dumb mistake, poor play. A loss is a loss. Again, that's just my opinion. Troll Puppet Master 6878 commented, I thought Jerry was going to pull the trigger and draft Sanders in the third. I was shocked it didn't happen. I don't think Jerry Jones has much influence in the draft process anymore. I think that's a lot of Will McClay and a lot of Stephen Jones and some other voices. Right? I think Jerry Jones can can have his input every now and then. But of course, there are rumors way back in the day that he wanted Johnny Manziel and was convinced to get Zach Martin. That obviously worked out. I think Jerry, when it comes to the draft, understands that he's got some guys on the staff, namely McClay, that are much smarter than he is in that regard and kind of delegates to him. So I think I agree with you. Jerry Jones probably wanted Shedeur Sanders just for all the reasons, all the media hype and all of that. And of course, Deion's a friend of his, but I think he was talked out of it and got Savone Revel, who I know the injuries have kept him from getting any sort of playing time, but he was a first-round talent that they got in the third round. Even if he doesn't become a factor until next year, that's a great value addition for the Dallas Cowboys. Glenart 101 commented, excellent commentary here. Thank you. I'm glad someone is willing to acknowledge that we are looking at second and third stringers. I want to see a lot more reps from these guys in the next game. Yeah, it's one of those things that, you see the performance, and I saw it, as a lot of you did, and you're like, God, this looked bad. But then you start watching other preseason games and you follow it, and you realize there are teams out there, the Bills, the Bengals, Washington, the Bears, that are playing starters, especially the Bengals and the Bears, playing a lot of starters, treating it like a serious game. While there are other teams like the Bills that don't care at all, literally do not care at all. And so you have to understand, okay, what is the mentality of the team? What is their goal of the preseason? Some teams' goal is to look good and score points and get the fans excited, right? Some teams' goal is to evaluate if their third string nickel corner should make the roster or not, right? The Bills have that second option. There are teams like the Bengals that have that first option, right? The first strategy. And the Cowboys are taking more the Buffalo Bills kind of approach in this instance. And the NFL's kind of split on this 50-50 of we want to see the second, third string guys and evaluate. We know the top of our roster is good, which it is for the Cowboys. Prescott, Lamb, Parsons, Odighizuwa, Bland, right? Diggs is hurt, but you can throw him in the mix as well. We know that Tyler Smith, we know the top of the roster is good. We don't need to see them play. They're going to be fine. We need to evaluate who's going to be our fourth tackle, who's going to be our backup corners, who's going to be, our nose tackle to fill in on the situation. That's what they need to find out, and that's what they've been going through the process of. We need to develop our quarterback. Like I said at the very beginning, it's clear the Cowboys' only goal this preseason on offense, I'll say their primary goal, not necessarily their only goal, was to develop Milton, and that's what they're sticking to. Stephen Vanover commented, a regular commentator, thank you, commenter, excuse me. For one, I'm glad you keep it real here unless one has experience and self-assessment, how to use it to improve. Many people confuse factual reality with being negative or pessimistic. Of course, ignoring reality does lead to the bubble effect with all of its well-known effects. Go Cowboys. Yeah, I think this is in regards to my commentary that I think September is going to be a rough month. And a lot of people said, whoa, it's very pessimistic and negative. And I said, look, you can just look at the injuries and you can look at a new team, new coaching staff, new culture, right? It's September, in my opinion, it's going to be rough, right? You have this many injuries at corner. Guyton may not be back yet at left tackle. New offense, new scheme, new number 2 receiver in Pickens, right? New strategies across the board. Nose tackle is going to probably have a new starter, right? There's going to be a lot of volatility. Micah Parsons, maybe he's in good game shape. Maybe it takes him a few weeks, right? There's going to be a lot of volatility. I think the first month is going to be rough. Things will improve, I think, the second half of the year. That's just my personal opinion. And again, I appreciate the comment there. I think that's just based on what I'm seeing in terms of the facts with the injuries and the new coaching staff and things like that. I hope I'm wrong, but I just think that's what's going to happen. Just my opinion. Cowboys, Chad, 5x778 commented, how much will Mingo's injury hamper us? Can Flournoy or Tilbrook fill that spot without a huge drop-off? It seemed like Mingo was having a solid camp. Yeah, he definitely was having a solid camp, at least reportedly. And this is where I'm a big fan of not playing starters, right? How would you like to have a starter, like a key player? Mingo's a role player. Let's be honest here with this Cowboys, right? He's not going to be like I mentioned before. He would be like the number 5 pass catcher behind, Pickens, Lamb, Ferguson, and Turpin, right? So, and that's not even counting like running backs out of the backfield or anything like that. So it's not like he would be a superstar, but he'd been having a good camp to be a role player, do some blocking things, make some one-on-one opportunities. But imagine if he was a starter. Imagine if that was Pickens that got hurt. I mean, that'd be devastating. Like, don't waste an opportunity here by playing starters in the preseason just to look good. And I think right now with Mingo out, as a drop-off as it will be in some regards, we know Tolbert can do fine, right? It's not great, but he can be fine. But we're going to see an opportunity for Flournoy or Holden to see if they deserve a spot on this team. This is their chance. We're going to see if they're going to step up. Damon Blackfire 2.049. Why on earth would I care or put any weight fact on the opinion of Denzel Washington and the Cowboys? That was someone telling me to listen to the Washington's rant. The commentator who chastised you for doing your job, then used a Hollywood person to back up their point, should never be allowed near a keyboard again. I think you can be allowed near a keyboard, and I appreciate the sentiment, but you do bring up a fantastic point, right? Like, there's this weird thing that happens in fandom, and certainly I think in the Cowboys, where someone famous or popular goes on and says something negative about Jerry Jones and the Cowboys, and people say, there, he gets it, right? We need to listen to what he has to say. Guys, Denzel Washington knows less about football than probably everyone watching this show right now. Nothing against him. Maybe he's a genius, football genius, but he's an actor. He's got other things on his plate, right? He just has high-level views. He goes on the talk shows because he's a star, right? He doesn't have any high-level insights or connections. Nothing against Denzel Washington, obviously. He's extremely talented, very wealthy, very successful, very famous. Big fan of his movies. But I think, having people say, look at what Denzel said. See, he's onto something there. That's like saying, look at what Taylor Swift said. She's onto something there, right? Come on. Let's use actual facts and data to back up our points. And that's exactly, I think, the point of your comment here. And I appreciate the comment, as always. Art Vanderlei 6974. So I mentioned yesterday how there was an NFL Network posted a fake news tweet from some random social media guys saying that Michael Parsons wanted to go to Denver, and Vanderlei then commented this, shows how thirsty the networks are for Cowboys content. For the NFL Network to post that Parsons tweet is downright unprofessional in Bush League. It is, and that tells you what happens with the Cowboys. I agree 100%. Literally, if I created a fake Dak Prescott account and just started posting things on it, it would be front page news, and they talk about it on First Take. They just would. Colin Cowherd will have a whole monologue about it because it just drives ratings. That is the power of the Dallas Cowboys. It's just a fact. Mighty Pepino 76 commented saying, I agree mostly with what you're saying about losing your starting quarterback, but what if Dak goes down for 4 games and we are 4-1 or 3-2? That's when you need a decent backup. Yeah, I agree if you're a championship team, right? And I think in 2022, they were a championship caliber team, right? They went 12 games and obviously retired Tom Brady and should have beaten San Francisco. And they had a really stacked roster. When Dak went down, Cooper Rush was able to go 4-1, right? And that's a situation where it makes sense to do that. The reality is Dallas this year, 2025, barring a great surprise that I would jump for joy about, I'm sure a lot of us would, they're not a championship team. I don't think they're a borderline playoff team. I think the odds are heavily against them making the playoffs. I would say, making the playoffs, missing the playoffs, I would say 30% make, 70% miss. That's just my gut feel right now. And so when I look at that and I say, okay, is it more important to have a quality backup quarterback when you're not a favorite to even make the playoffs, or is it more important to develop a potentially young quarterback? I would lean toward developing a young quarterback. And look, if Dak Prescott goes down, it doesn't matter who your backup is. With this team, the odds of you making the playoffs get pretty close to 0. So with that in mind, you go more the developmental route, right? You got to kind of change a little bit based on your team's expectations. And I think this is why the Cowboys under Schottenheimer are focusing on Milton, because they understand this is a multi-year process. I've said this before, but this feels like 2005, 2003 Dallas Cowboys, 2013 Cowboys, where they're kind of figuring things out, developing some guys, getting ready for a run 1 or 2 years into the future. They're a couple years away right now. And I think we see that when it comes to some key positions. Gridiron Gripes commented, worshiping data is just an unintentional admission that you have no idea what you're watching. Look, I made this point before with people on this, is you look at data as part of the scientific method, right? You observe, you watch the game, you can watch the film, and you sit there and make a hypothesis. Oh, Mozzie Smith isn't good. And then you look at the data, and that can either prove or disprove your hypothesis. If it proves it, okay, great, that validates what you saw. If it disproves it, then you need to go back and look at the film, or go back and look at the footage, or reevaluate the data, right? Retest it. So again, data comes second. You observe, and then you come up with a hypothesis, then you test that with the data. People say, oh, you worship data. You should just look at the film. Not necessarily, right? Unless you know the play that was called, unless you know everything, the film is just the observation, the scientific method. You have to test it, right? That's that next step. You can't just look at film or just look at data, right? You have to do both together, create your observation, and then test. That's a scientific method. That's the right approach to make. This last comment here is from Wyatt Newman 5168. It's more than reasonable not to have an extensive evaluation of Jay Toya yet due to him being a young player in a tough position. I also know you have mentioned him plenty of times in earlier videos, but what is your latest assessment of him and what is your current prediction of his role throughout this season? We got some reps with the first string defense. I think I mentioned this during training camp and did some, decent things. He's been kind of a thrill a minute in terms of defensive performance. There's been some plays where he's like, hey, man, that's pretty darn good. Fight off a double team, make the tackle, hold the gap. There's been some other plays that not so good, right? I don't think he had a particularly good game against the Rams, for example. But he's a young guy. He's a rookie. He's a 7th rounder, I believe, if memory serves. So it's going to be a little volatile at times. but I think he's trending in the right direction. And I think Schottenheimer said that too, right? A second ago, I think I mentioned it earlier, that Toye is a guy, he's commended his performance against the Baltimore Ravens. Want to see him continue to improve. If he continues to improve, I think he's a backup defensive tackle who can fill some roles for the Cowboys in certain situations. If the Cowboys go veteran, which they still might at that position, that one technique interior defensive tackle position, I think he'll be probably the third string guy and maybe he's a practice squad guy. But right now, to me, if the roster stays the way I think it will end up being, again, just my opinion, Perry and Winfrey is the starting nose tackle, which is okay at best. And then Toye is a backup with some certain situations. So I think he's doing better than people probably expected in some ways. Definitely a little inconsistent, but listen, he's a rookie, right? I think if he can just clean up some of the things and build on the Baltimore game, this Cowboys coaching staff will be very happy, giving him, again, situational roles. We're not talking about a day one starter that, comes in and does a great job. Maybe eventually he'll get there by the end of the season or in the future, but I think he's trending in the right direction, and he seems to be doing a lot of the good things, like the little things, to impress the coaching staff. Definitely a guy to keep an eye on for sure. All right, that's all the comments for today. Appreciate you guys have great comments. Always like talking to you guys. My favorite part of the show is the comments. Look, we got a few days of practice here before the Cowboys' last preseason game. I mean, again, what's become clear is that the Cowboys' primary goal on offense this preseason was to evaluate Joe Milton. Everything else is a distant second, right? That's a fact. So you have to take that with a grain of salt. Their entire focus evaluating and developing Joe Milton. So everything else that has happened on offense, you almost have to put that to the side. Booker did really well. That's great to see. Blue trending in the right direction to play. Like to see him get some more snaps there because I think he's the Deuce Vaughn replacement. I think it's clear Javonte Williams is RB1. Can Blue be RB2? That's a big question going forward. I think on defense right now, we look at cornerback depth. They go the veteran here. They got some questions there. I think some of these corners, whether it's Booth, whether it's Pride, I think they're close to getting cut. Childress is a guy with Keeman Hall. I think they both survive at the nickel, at least for the first half of the season. But I think some of these outside corners, they're on their way out. But we'll have to see. Again, last week of practice, final preseason game for people to make their stamp as they try and make this Cowboys roster. Exciting time. I bet a lot of news is going to follow over the next week or so, so stay tuned. Got a Shamar James film review coming this week, I think before the game. I want to try and get it out either Wednesday or Thursday, so make sure you stay tuned for that. But until next time, I'm Nick, and this is Saturday Morning Inspection.